Hello, my name is Raul Perez. I am a senior student here at Nova Southeastern University studying art and design, and I am here to speak about Blender. More importantly, go give you a slight overview of what Blender is if you're unaware, and to speak on the applications that there exist, and explain why you, as not just an art student, but students studying from many other fields, would be a worthy investment of your time to learn. It is important to know that Blender is a free open source program.
That was easy enough.
Um,
Let's
and to
keep it
get on the
going.
more
Let's see how
technical
many more
side of
nines
it,
we can get.
Blender is released under the GNU General Public License. So what that means is that you are free to use Blender for any purpose. You are free to distribute Blender if you want to. You can study how Blender works and you can change it, and you can also distribute those changed versions that you made or that you found, and you can distribute them even more to other people that you know. And so it is due to all of these kind of like statements from the release of Blender and how it's free and open source. Pretty means that almost there's very little barrier to entry when it comes to economically. Small independent artists, like if you're making a project by yourself, you're more than welcome to use Blender. But also major studios use Blender. Scientists use it for research. Students can use it for or teachers can use it for education. So you don't have to shell out a huge amount to try out Blender for yourself. Plus, you can rest assured that any artwork or any project that you make in Blender is owned by you. Blender does not care what you use it for. Anything that you create is your own intellectual property. Now, to start exploring what Blender can do, one of the major functions that Blender has is to render videos and images from assets that you may have. Because Blender can support all types of files, like 3D files, like OBJs, GLBs, and others. They can support image files, kind of like JPEGs, PNGs. I believe GIFs too. They're very open on that, and some videos as well. You can work in 2D or 3D. Blender supports both if you need it, depending on what your project is. And one of the benefits of using Blender for your rendering is that they have something called the cycles, which is their own rendering engine. And the benefit is that it supports ray tracing, which is pretty much like real-time, super realistic physics simulations of light and how it reflects and bounces off of surfaces, which can be really good if you're going for a very photorealistic look, or if it's just an effect that you would like to play around with and test. And of course, when it comes to the assets, you can import already made assets from 3D program sites like Sketchfab that already have 3D models for you to download, or you could take the time to learn how to create your own models. And that usually works with, you start with like basic geometric forms like circle, shape, and cubes. And you use subdivision, cuts, and loops to extrude or cut out pieces from this basic geometric object to create whatever you want, and it's very in-depth. It's very complicated, but there are many videos on YouTube to help you with this process. If you decide to use Blender for your 3D
Gonna have a
models instead of just importing them
lot
from
of people
outside
changing their
sources,
sheets in the morning.
there are some things that can help you out, such as the abundance of
That's the
shortcuts
risk
that
you take
Blender
falling asleep to
has.
this
They also have
content,
modifiers, which pretty much are like non-destructive effects that will kind of work or
We've
affect
warned
your
you many
object as you're
times.
working on it to kind of cut out on
Wait, that didn't
tedious
win?
work of you replicating a certain effect like symmetry or stuff like that. And the addition of UV wrapping also allows you to work with textures and being able to apply them easily on your models as well if you're going that far or that route. But just modeling is not the only way to create assets in Blender. Blender also supports a sculpting workplace, and where you kind of start with like an organic shape like a sphere, and using either your mouse or if you have kind of like a Wacom tablet of sorts, you can use pretty much like a digital brush to kind of like pull and push in this like mass, the digital mass you have to sculpt something as if you're using like your hands to manipulate ceramics. And of course, if your interface of choice supports like pressure variations, then that can also come in healthy. Blender has many sculpting tools to help bring your concepts to life, and they have
Hello.
well over 20 different brushes that have be customized, and also the ability to create new brushes if the ones that are come in by stock are not good enough for what you need it for. Another thing that Blender is very well known for is for its use in animations. Blender has its own dedicated workspace to rig and to animate your models that you create or import. Now, rigging is a complex process where you kind of envelop and you put in pretty much bones and joints in your models to help them articulate and move. But of course, that's nothing that a few YouTube tutorials can't fix. In Blender, a lot of artists and filmmakers actually use Blender because Blender has been known to be used for some award-winning short animated films and feature films as well. Just to name two examples of films that have used Blender that you might have heard of at least. One of them is the very famous Backrooms animation video by King Pixels. That he has gone to state that he used Blender 3D in order to use that to create that animation. And today, as I checked, it's sitting around 64 million views. So that goes to show that very small independent artists can also take Blender, a very free and online resource, and create amazing pieces of media or artwork or films if you have the passion for it. And another example could be for full-on feature film, not just short films or small YouTube videos. A movie on Netflix by the name of Next Gen is actually a whole feature film, animated film, that was made almost entirely in Blender. So again, also shows that not just independent artists, but large studios also use Blender for all their workflows and all their needs. Blender also supports 2D animations as well by letting you draw in a 3D environment. And the applications that could be for storyboarding, cut-in animations, motion graphics, onion skinning, and much more. So again, if your main medium is 2D art and animations, then Blender can also support that if that is what you dedicate yourself to. That's something that not many people, at least on a surface level, might not be aware of, is that Blender can also do very light video editing as well. So you have film or video projects and that can take care of that in Blender. Another plus side of Blender is that right there integrated you have VFX pretty much. You can use the built-in compositor to post-produce renders in Blender to create camera effects, color grading, vignettes, and much more to, fix it in post if you need it. You can also manually or automatically track or motion track objects with your own raw footage to create impressive visual effects all in Blender. Another useful tool for Blender for film projects or for small short video renders are simulations. Blender can run all types of simulations such as fire, smoke, fluids, hair, cloth, and rigid bodies, and also as particles to create any scene that you can imagine. To get into some more of the technical side of it, Blender they support all kinds of import and export options and file formats. For image files, you usually got JPEGs, PNGs, Targas, OpenEXRs, Xeon, Radiance, HDRs, and more. For video files, you got AVI, MPNG, and QuickTime on Macs if you have those. For 3D files, you can get stuff like 3D Studio, Collada, DAE, Filmbox, Autodesk, OBJs, motion captures, and much more. There's a support file formats such as Alembic and Universal Scene Description for imports and exports. So now you might be asking, if you're going to spend all the time to learn all these tools and tips and tricks in Blender, then, what's the point of it? So just describe a few uses for Blender and whatever you create in it. For example, if you're an illustrator or concept artist and you want a scene, for example, of a bedroom with a lot of geometrical shapes like shelves, books, desks, tables in it, you want to draw it in a very weird and unique perspective, then you can render your background and create it yourself with the models in Blender. You can export that image into your drawing software, and you can use that as a reference to draw on. And people do not just environments, maybe also deal with the character design. So you might do a really rough model of your character, and you can play around with the lighting in order to understand and study how to render your characters with your digital brushes or traditional as well. So it's a great tool for artists to make for references. It can also be used, again, for VR, AR, or game making in any platforms. You can use your media models, you can insert rigging and skeletons in it, and then you can export those models into Unity or Unreal Engine in order to create and code with them to create, physical boundaries, collision, and coding for whatever game or project you're working on. And stuff like the models can also be used for education or research purposes as well. For example, a university might, spend some time to model a heart or some other organ, for example, and allow, medical students to at least examine these models up close without having to, cut someone open if that is not always available. Well, to wrap up this video, I just want to remind you that this has just been a very light overview of Blender. I'm just scratching the surface on the tools and the possibilities that you can have if you apply Blender into your workflow. It is very apt to handle all types of projects such as 2D and 3D animations, simulations, video editing, post-production editing, or simulations, and much more than that. So Blender can pretty much be almost anything that you want it to be.
That's too big.
And with that, I hope to at least expose you to this really cool software and to pique your interest and encourage you to dive into it and explore it for yourself. And with that, I am Merle Perez, and I hope that you have a good one.